happy to be here. As Julia said, my name is Michelle Warner. I'm a coach and a mentor at Agile Rising and an SPCT, and quite pleased to be here. The three things that I'm going to talk about today are some of the characteristics of a PMO and how that has evolved to a VMO, because I think it's important to understand that evolution and understand how that fits into the success of the LPM, because that's also been changing as it goes along. I'm going to talk about three different experiences that I personally had and the impact on the organization that I was working with at the time. And also at the very end, why the VMO is the secret sauce to setting up a successful LPM. So when we look at this, we have to start off with the PMO and think about the reason that the PMO was built. So we have to go back in history just a little bit, not that far, but just a little bit. And the traditional PMO was built to support this kind of cycle where this opportunity emerged and then the opportunity was leveraged. And sometimes, especially when we think about the cycles that it used to be able to support, which was 2 years, and you think about where we are now, can we, from a business perspective, still have a 2-year-long cycle? Or is that too late? The PMO is also built to support a very, the traditional PMO is built to support a very heavy phase gate process. And I worked in one organization where it was 154 phase gates from the time a business opportunity emerged through to when it could actually be released from a software cycle development perspective. And that might have worked in the past. But if we're thinking about 2 years from when someone thinks of something and we can actually put it out there for the world to look at and experiment with, does it still work? And maybe it's time to move on and look at work differently. When we also think about this traditional PMO and the impact that it has on the LPM, and here's where I'm going a little bit into SAFe, I'm diving down into principle number 9. The traditional PMO supported a very centralized decision process, right? Centralized control, which on the LPM, we're actually trying to decentralize decisions. We're trying to make sure that the decisions that are made are actually, what decisions can be made at the art level or even at the team level. It also, traditional PMO also supports very detailed project plans, the concept of there being only one solution and only one right solution up front. And our experience teaches us that that's a very unrealistic expectation. I make that statement. Think about the projects, and I use the word projects very specifically. Think about the projects that are 6 months, longer than 6 months that you've been involved with. And have you ever done one that does not have a change request on it? Most probably the answer is no. So that means that detailed project plans don't actually support the concept of not having change requests. The reality is we are going to have change requests. So let's make change requests easier to manage, right? We also, the traditional PMO approach supports waterfall milestones, and that means that problems are realized too late. I often say an agile framework does not solve for everything, but what it does do is it surfaces them up earlier. So, and when we think about this traditional PMO approach is a very consistent, predictable process, well, it makes it very hard to change. It makes it very hard to adjust to changing market conditions. And the changing market conditions are happening a lot quicker, and they tend to be a lot bigger now. I don't know how many people, for example, AI, right? It seems like it burst on the scene 4 or 5 months ago. Well, you've had to change a whole bunch of different things now. How do we incorporate AI into what we do? A couple companies knew about it and have started incorporating into it, but you hear a lot more of, oh, we didn't even know that this was on the horizon kind of thing. And it's impacting us in a pretty big way. So those are just some of the things that keep happening that seem to take us by surprise. Now, what is this evolution that I'm mentioning about the PMO? It really is a mindset. and I'm going to mention SAFE again. When you look at SAFE 4.0, which was 4 years ago or 5 years ago-ish, PMO was mentioned. And there was just one slide on there, I think. And then version 5.0 came out, and the APMO started appearing, and you started reading about it in the industry and in literature. And now in version 6.0 that's come out, you'll see that the VMO has been mentioned in multiple places, and also that it has evolved. And the evolution is all about the mindset. It's about going from this, what is it going to cost? What moving resources, and I'm using resources specifically, to the work, and also thinking about which projects are going to bring in the most revenue, and measuring progress by movement through these phase gates. And the mindset that we want to change to, especially the last one, is instead of thinking about what is it going to cost, what's the value that it's going to generate? And that's looking at it differently. We want to move work to long-lasting, stable teams instead of moving resources to the work. We also want to make sure that instead of thinking about projects, we think about, hey, we've got these stable teams. What work do we have that we can shift to these stable teams? And instead of thinking about how far are we along and we measure it by phase gates, we want this continuous delivery of value and feedback. And that should actually be how we measure how far along we are. So mindset change, right? Going from PMO to VMO. And I've mentioned VMO, but I haven't actually defined it. So let me define what is the VMO. And this is a rough definition. We're going to flush it out a little bit further. So the VMO, it's a cross-functional, and I put business team in there because quite often we don't have, it's not development, it's not your traditional development team, but it is a team. And the entire focus of what it's trying to do is make sure that it supports others. And supports others in the continuous delivery of value. It's very adaptive. The work that comes in continues to shift and change depending upon what phase we're in the implementation. And also, if we're adding new trains in, well, then we might be actually spending more time doing VSIs, value stream identification sessions, or if we're more in the reteaming. Because, hey, we've been doing this for a while, we're shifting the way that we're going to do, we're actually going to reteam and change our arts, then guess what? We're actually going to be, as the VMO, we're actually going to be concentrating on that maybe a bit more, supporting that more. But the whole thing is that it helps to promote a faster flow of value. So how is it that we can remove some phase gates? How is it that we can decentralize decisions? Right? And the main thing that it does when we're thinking about all of this is that it helps to create this communication and alignment in between the three different dimensions of the LPM. Because when you think about the three different dimensions that have been set up and the way, especially version 6.0 works, these are the strategy and investment, you've got different people working in that. And then lean governance, you've got different groups working in that. And then the agile portfolio operations, you've got different groups. Well, how is it that they remained aligned to what's going on? How is it that decisions that are made with regard to strategy investment, how does that information trickle down or trickle across to not just the arts, but the LPMs, our business owners, and everybody that's working within the framework? Well, the VMO is responsible for that, which is why I stuck them in the middle. So going back, 3 experiences. My very first one, this started off with a traditional PMO and the LACE, because at the time it was a LACE, and this was back in 2015. This was my second SAFE implementation. We had about 750 people in 7 arts. And the way that the funding had been allocated was for 5 years. So I'm just giving you some background on there. And the PMO was assigned to this very large implementation. Now, I had a very bad experience with the PMO, and I avoided them like crazy because I had a very traditional PMO beforehand. And I think that, as an aside, this also sometimes shows a very agilist bias towards the PMO that some of us have, right? But this PMO actually changed my mind with regard to this. So the PMO lead at the time came by and said, hey, they stopped by my office and they said, let's go out for coffee. And I did not want to go. As I said, I had been avoiding them. But I was curious about it, so I accepted it. And she said, hey, Michelle, we're really excited. And this was back in 2015. We're really excited about this new way of working. And we want to be involved in working in a new way. And we want to be engaged and we want to help. So I was like, okay, hey, this is exciting. So how is it that we can get you all involved? So we brainstormed and we actually asked the PMO team, which was a team of like 4 people themselves, hey, how do you want to do this? And we decided that we were going to do a leading safe class. And then how is it that based upon the principles and the understanding of the framework, we can get the PMO involved? I think the key to this was actually asking the PMO themselves, how do you want to do this after they understood it? And they said, you know what? This lace thing that we keep mentioning everywhere, we should be that. I'm like, that's great. Let's do that. But not just the lace thing, but the PMO is the lace. So this was one model, which the PMO was actually the lace. And the characteristics of the people that were a part of it is they were actually really excited about the change. And they were willing to engage with people. So they weren't like a white tower PMO. They actually they participated in the PI planning sessions. They actually helped to kick it off. And the thing that excited me so much about it is that they were willing to experiment with the work, the way that this LACE PMO group was actually working. So we worked as a team. We had as a Scrum team, we actually had different ways of keeping track of the work that we had to do. It was just really interesting. The major thing that they brought into this, so they were actually a part of the implementation. The major thing that they brought into it that helped what we were trying to do so much was that they had this deep knowledge of how the organization actually worked. So when we were trying to figure out, hey, we need to actually rent out a conference hall because we have 750 people that need to do PI planning together. They were like, okay, we know how to do the purchase order for this. We know how to make sure that the work that we're doing, that this rental thing of this conference hall, we know who to go to make sure that it gets approved. So that helped us out from an organizational perspective tremendously. When you think about how this impacted what we were going to do and the 3 dimensions of this, there were some opportunities that came out. There were some improvements that we could do. The LPM meetings that we were having, because we were trying to set up the LPM, 750 people, 7 trains, we desperately needed that connection to what was happening at the enterprise level. So we were setting up the LPM, they were not consistently meeting. And because of that, it almost became a phase gate of itself. And the meetings took hours because the meetings were ad hoc. They weren't on a cadence. And sometimes we didn't have very strong facilitation for this. We also had issues with some of our tools were not set up for portfolio Kanban. So we had to do PowerPoint status reports. And that meant that sometimes some of the latest and greatest information that we had was actually not available for decisions. Unfortunately, that impacted that the PMO was not helping, and they weren't being invited to some of the portfolio events. And so sometimes our arts were not aware of some of the decisions made. And the PMO did not help in funding some of the strategy and investment that was there. All of this, like we had really good metrics. So our agile portfolio dimension was strong. We had good metrics. The art and team backlogs were known. The velocities and cycle times were known. And PI planning was absolutely solid. But the other 2 dimensions, they kind of struggled. Right? So I took these learnings went on into my second implementation. It wasn't my second implementation, but it's the second experience I'm going to talk about. And this was in 2019, and this was a very large pet supply and services company. We had 2 ARTs, about 250 people. And in this one, the LACE and the APMO were actually separate. The previous characteristics that we had were still all there. We had an enthusiasm, we had that mindset shift for the PMO, and we had this willingness to learn and work in a different way. And there was also this connection into the organization, and this is key because again, this has to be very important for us. So the APMO supported the RTEs again during PI planning, and the APMO also dealt with the contracts, and that helped because we were trying to change some of our contract to make it a little bit more agile contracting. And when I talk about the reason why the relationship with executives became important from the APMO perspective, because when I was first brought in, about 50% of the C-suite and the executives had or were in the process of leaving. So that's a lot of turnover at that level. And it put the LACE in a position to be able to set up and start to drive the portfolio, and start thinking about, hey, what are the strategic themes and OKRs that we're going to be doing? Now, normally you expect some of those strategic themes to be coming that C-suite and executive level, but when you have 50% of that turnover there, the LACE and the APMO, they kind of stepped in. Actually, it was the APMO that stepped in and said, hey, we're going to create these so our ARTs know where to go, right? And it was really cool because then as the C-suite and the executives were hired, we could actually share with them, this is the APMO, could share with them and say, well, these are the strategic themes that we're going towards. And they kind of went, yeah, okay, that's great. We're going to leave you alone. And so we continued doing our own thing on that until they could kind of sort themselves out a little bit and then start to create strategic themes. And that's how, from the LPM perspective, or the APMO perspective, we influenced the C-suite, which is super interesting because you think about there should be this influence that should be happening both ways on that, right? The LACE, actually, in this instance, the APMO was responsible for doing a lot of that strategic stuff, while the LACE actually could concentrate on driving the cultural transformation for the portfolio and the work that we were thinking about that. And when you think about that 3 dimensions on that and the way that this happened, our agile portfolio operations was strong, because and the LACE drove the portfolio setup. The APMO was not involved with that. They were involved in some different part of it, and the lean governance was also pretty strong. What did happen, though, from an opportunity perspective, is that we had these 2 different groups that were not always in step with each other. And there were some opportunities that were created. We did have some miscommunication that happened. And I personally found that there was also a lack of some facilitation skills. What also happened, again, happening that portfolio events were set up at the last minute. And some of that facilitation that we're asking for did not happen. So when we look at that, yeah, we had 2 strong dimensions going, not as strong as we would have liked elsewhere. So coming into our 3rd experience, which is happening in 2022, we actually have a VMO that emerges with the LACE that's coming out from that. And in this instance, the VMO is actually a larger part, and then we have the LACE that's actually embedded within there. When this all kind of happening, we did a complete reboot. We even retaught the LPM course. And the current setup that we have right now is that our VMO has about 12 people on it, and our LACE has 2 people that are kind of responsible for the transformation. The characteristics are the same as the previous two. One of the things I want to point out is that this is not a hierarchy. Some people, because I got this question before, is like, are we thinking that the VMO dictates what the LACE is doing or the LACE dictates what the VMO is doing? No, absolutely not. We work as a team. There's no hierarchy in there. And we actually work as a safe Scrum team. We have a backlog that starts with the features that's set up. We have a product manager. Product manager. He's actually our sponsor. He sets up that feature backlog that gets facilitated by the VMO. And so then we have a product owner that takes that and helps with the story that's going on with that. All of this helps the VMO helps the LACE in the transition and transformation. And as I mentioned earlier, we've had these issues where we've got some changing priorities that are happening, and it allows us as a team to adapt much quicker to these changing priorities. One of the responsibilities that the VMO should be doing is that they should be facilitating the portfolio meetings. And we've actually been able to strengthen that. And our portfolio meetings actually get done within an hour now, as needed, right? But we have a cadence that gets set up, and then the meetings, if there's nothing new to talk about, they actually get canceled. But that also means we have full participation because the meetings are set up and they're on a cadence. One of the things that the VMO is also responsible for now is understanding the strategic themes and helping the leadership group come up with these strategic themes and the OKRs for all of that. When we think about the way that this is set up now, some of the strengths that we have are that we actually have these strategic themes and OKRs that are set up that support this organization that as a totality is about 900 people. When we take into consideration all of the operational people that are necessary beyond the development value streams, right? We also have as I mentioned earlier, setting up and facilitating all of the portfolio events. We're starting to work on now getting those guardrails set up. We've got a first draft out there that we're starting to implement for our trains. We're actually changing the guardrails based upon the feedback from the trains. The really cool thing for me also is that we're starting to influence other parts of the organization. So we're starting to reach into the agency PMO and actually saying, hey, these phase gates, they're not really necessary. Can we get rid of some of them? Which is really nice because we're actually starting to influence and change the organization's PMO. All of this, of course, is to support that business agility value stream that we want to do. And starting to apply lean to existing operational systems. So looking into some of the different missions and how is it that we can bring some of these different lean concepts into them. And one of the things that we've learned, and it's been such a hard lesson, is that whatever it is that we're communicating, we think about how is it that we can communicate this times 100%. So yeah, I know we sent out an email, not sufficient. We have, how else can we do it? So we're putting it up in Teams chats. We're sending out more emails. We're doing power hours. We're setting up office hours, and any big change that comes along, we communicate it like seriously 10 times more than what you might think we need to. So the impacts that we're kind of seeing on this one are the facilitation. I mean, that for me has been really huge, is that having somebody that we know is actually supposed to facilitate the LPM, and that is part of their job, has helped with think about value and not just projects. It also helps with when you have somebody that understands that this is their role, is to help facilitate and actually help manage that portfolio Kanban, and they understand the concepts of the cone of uncertainty and design thinking. They really start to push on when exactly do we need to know this information. We don't need to know it all up front, but we do need to know it before we can actually get past this one state within the portfolio Kanban. And that's been really big. Because especially when you come from some organizations where they do this big upfront design, now we have a group of people that have the influence and have the knowledge and can talk to people and say, actually, we don't need to know that now. We don't need to know that for until the next month. Let's get this information so we can make decisions. And that's helped us because sometimes we haven't had capacity to pull in work. And we've been able to tell that and say, well, don't work on that yet because we actually don't have capacity yet. So don't work on that. And then the information has changed. The needs have actually changed from our customer. 3 months ago, they were saying, we need this. And now they're saying, actually, we don't need that. But what we need is this. So it's been interesting. And the big thing is that, hey, we work, as I mentioned before, as a Scrum or a Kanban team. So I know, and I'm constantly thinking about, hey, what is the thing that I'm going to change in the next time, the next place where I get to influence? And I actually think that I'm going to look at this where I have two teams, but they have to have some intersection. So not necessarily embedding one team within another, but I'd like to experiment with this and say, I've got a LACE and I've got a VMO, but I've got to make sure that they actually chat with each other, right? Definitely, so clear assignment of people. You're a part of the LPM, you're a part of LACE, you're a part of the VMO. I really like the way that this turned out, which is when we had our LPM course, we included all of the VMO and LACE members and changing in there, like when we're actually going through the LPM course to say, okay, now let's talk about guardrails. Let's come up with a draft version of guardrails as we go through it. So setting up the LPM and the LACE as agile teams with a Scrum Master, with a product owner, and actually having stand-ups or syncs. They don't have to be every day. Our current VMO sync takes place 3 times a week. And we've experimented twice and it just wasn't enough, so we went back to 3 times. So we've experimented with the cadence of that, right? Making sure that the VMO actually understands that their responsibilities are to set up and facilitate the portfolio events and make sure that those 4 guardrails are set up, right? Also, the VMO is responsible for the measurement domains. So, hey, how is it that we're going to measure our outcomes? How is it that we're going to measure our flow? How is it that we're going to measure the competency of our teams? The VMO is responsible for that. So making sure, again, that they understand that. And if there is an enterprise PMO, make sure that we actually involve them also and start to influence outside of the portfolio. And this one has been a really big one for me, is setting up that communication strategy and making sure that we follow it and communicate 100 times more than what you think you might need to. I cannot emphasize that one enough because it's surprising to me when as I'm talking to team members, they're like, oh, well, we didn't even hear about that. I was like, it was mentioned here, here, and here. Oh, well, no, didn't go to any one of those 3 things. Okay. How else then can we change our communication strategy so that you know? Because communication should be both push and pull, right? We should be pushing communication out, but we also have to set things up where people pull it in if they need it. So kind of wrapping back to the beginning and thinking about what is it that the VMO should do. So the VMO should actually support this concept of, hey, a business opportunity emerges through to when it is that we actually get it out there and it can be leveraged. And hopefully get it down to, instead of 2 years, get it down to about 2 to 6 months. And understanding that the way that this happens is through communication and alignment across those 3 dimensions that I mentioned earlier. That's it. That's my chat. Said it was pretty close, 33 minutes. There we go.